Hello, and thanks for Sung Hoon for, like I told him just now, saving my butt. I got lost in Turku, which the first time for everything. But yeah, fear and panic, and now I'm here. So it's nice.
Everything is okay.
Thank you very much to the organizers as well. Okay, so my title for this talk is The Representation of the Psychedelic Experience in the Media and What to Make of It. A very long title, but I couldn't come up with a snappier one at the time. So I was kind of prompted to give this type of presentation because I started seeing things such as the article you can see there on the top left of the screen, which is in Finnish, which is an article about a psychedelic festival. And I'll translate the headline. It says, "A psychedelic festival experience sober. It can be done," says the DJ there. Probably something like that. But then I started thinking about, is it really possible? What is a psychedelic experience without psychedelics? Without, I don't know if this is an ugly word, but intoxication, in a sense. And now that we have a kind of psychedelic renaissance going on, we see more and more of this imagery and of apparently representations of the psychedelic experience everywhere. And it kind of gets under your skin. Of course, I went to see a wonderful textile show at the Design Museum in Helsinki. And we have these wonderful loom weaving things, which to me was pretty psychedelic. It looks like it. Some of them were kind of depictions of the artists' migraine headaches and the auras, apparently, which makes sense to me as another migraine sufferer. I could see that too. Therapy, the future of therapy. You have that mushroom image there. People are putting money into this stuff. And business is booming. And I don't know, there's Doctor Strange there as well, which apparently is a very psychedelic film. I haven't seen it, but what I have seen of it, it looks like quite psychedelic. So, all of this stuff kind of is trying to gel in my mind, and I'm kind of trying to look at this thing sincerely. I don't really have any skin in this game myself, so I'm trying to explore the question and trying to come up with answers, and at least I came up with more problems, if nothing else. Right. Okay. So in the past, I've researched, I've written about how narratives of hallucinations get written and the conventions that you have in those narratives, and they kind of become conventionalized over time. I won't go too much into it, but basically the pattern there is, or the thing that I've kind of banged on about for a few years, is that there's a kind of standardized narrative about how somebody takes hallucinogens, and then it's obviously a therapeutic experience and life-changing experience, and then it's a kind of redemption arc, we would call it in narratology and other fields like that, literary studies, and then you're kind of more or less saved in the end. Yeah, and that goes on and on and on and on, it seems, starting with De Quincey, going to Fitzhugh Ludlow, and all the rest follow. Variations occur, of course. And there again, I have the idea that some of these narratives, they're not really describing the psychedelic experience. They're kind of riffing on previous experiences and descriptions of them. imitating the imitations and so on, all that good stuff that we just heard about. Okay. The obvious question then, are we dealing with reports of experiences or kind of permutations of this conventional imagery when we think about this stuff? Does the psychedelic imagery then kind of enter into our experience itself, and we're replicating that as I suppose, what Sung-Hong just kind of talked about with his work. So these are questions that kind of float around in the same ways in literary studies. And, well, you start to worry, at least I do, because I kind of thought with the previous work that I was trying to think about what Benjamin Green calls, it's a wonderful term, the epistemology of intoxication, in one of his books, The Age of Intoxication, I think it was called. Wonderful book. But I think I'm kind of leaning towards the aesthetics of intoxication and psychedelic experiences recently. And there we open a kind of Pandora's box of what are we talking about? Are we talking aesthetics? Are we talking epistemology? What is going on here? And does it really make such a huge difference that we have to worry about it? Well, there are a few things we can worry about. Here's a kind of roundabout example about ghosts and things seen in the night, which kind of works the same way. I think it's a sort of an analogy I would like to draw here. Hallucinations and the descriptions of hallucinations then have a history, it says here, and I stand by that statement, that can be traced in literature and art. And the same applies to these ghost stories. There's even literary greats like Defoe at some point were very involved in ghost, exploring what it means to see a ghost or specter or spirit and what are these things. Then you get into strange territory when you start thinking about this stuff. The way people see ghosts change, probably around the time when photography becomes a thing, and double exposure becomes a thing, and ghost photography becomes a great popular pastime. And all of a sudden, ghosts are transparent. They look like double exposures. What happened? Well, obviously the medium influenced the way we think about ghosts, maybe even the way we see ghosts. And that really, doesn't mean that demystifying and deflationary explanations were not the norm at the time either. We can look at Victorian scientists, early British psychologists, we might call them. It's, up for debate if we can call them psychologists. There's a wonderful headline there. Victorian scientists thought they found an explanation for ghosts, but the public didn't want to hear it. Bad explanations. Examples here. John Ferrier, I have two doctors here from Manchester, I think they were, in a book called An Essay Towards a Theory of Apparitions. Well, an essay. He says, quote, a morbid disposition of the brain is capable of producing spectral impressions without any external prototypes. So without seeing anything, your brain is a mess. You might see things, hallucinate. It's kind of a natural phenomenon now. Don't worry about it. Samuel Hibbert, well, actually, I shouldn't say do worry about it, but, not because of the metaphysical implications of everything. Another doctor called Samuel Hibbert, who was known, they knew each other, I think, in a book called Sketches of the Philosophy of Apparitions from 1825, said, and this is a longer quote, I'll read it, quote, the figures of many phantasms may be indiscriminately referred to the delineations of those enthusiastic declaimers, historians, or poets who have boldly attempted to supply from their own wild fantasy the forms which they have supposed to have been imperfectly described in sacred records. That's a Victorian person for you. But it basically says that somebody else has read about all these apparitions and things, and then you kind of downloaded that stuff into your brain, and then of course you see that stuff because you've been told that this is what you're supposed to see. So it's basically a cultural feedback loop they're describing there. It's nothing short of that, I don't think. Okay. Well, you can't keep a good idea down. So, of course, we have what I would call a kind of remystification. Please, nobody don't be insulted by the term, by the way. I mean, or what I'm about to say now. I say this with love and utter respect. You might have a kind of Jungian perspective, said, and similar views, which kind of deal with the phenomenon very seriously, differently. But there's an element of mysticism there, whether it's, psychologized or sort of anthropomorphized or whatever you do. I would probably even put William James in this category, in the stripping away of all the apparatus of the mind and then sort of getting raw data in. That would lead us to Huxley, as we just heard in the previous paper as well, laws of perception being cleansed and all the rest of it. That leaves us a kind of ember of mystery behind it, which I do really, really enjoy and promote as well. You might have a kind of phenomenological way of dealing with these things where you simply just bracket the metaphysical questions, which is fine. Maybe even a postmodern kind of way where these images fly around in the ether and we are mystified by the images themselves. Then you might be in a headspace or something else where you find just permutations of the imagery within the psychedelic canon, which are just kind of recycled, and the imagery takes on a life of its own, I've said here. Basically, in that case, we are in the realm of aesthetics, not really epistemology per se, maybe in some roundabout way, or not really in phenomenological questions either, but kind of in the realm of aesthetics, which I kind of like because that's where I live most of my days. So it's great, and nights probably as well. Okay. Well, if you go into the arts today, and I've looked at narratives and stories from the 1600s to the 1800s. So this is new and exciting for me to get a little less dusty examples. You have an example of, Gaspar Noé's Enter the Void, I think that is. I think there's a really great description of probably a DMT experience in that one, which I looked at, and yeah, that's it. That's correct, I thought. And then I saw some works by Namjoon Paik, of course, the great media artist that worked for years and years with media itself, distorting videos and broadcasts and things. And those, I don't think he was ahead, really, but in the sense that we would think of psychedelics, really, but I don't know. But they are very psychedelic for me as well when I see them. And then, of course, there's a Finnish duo there called Pink Twins, who creates noise music and all kinds of algorithmic and weird visuals to boot. And I think that's the closest I've kind of had to an actual psychedelic experience without psychedelics. So it can happen that way too. I'm not going into anything like yoga or breathing things or meditation or endurance tests or anything like that, because I really don't know enough about that stuff to say. But so my examples here are limited. But then when I start to kind of unpack all of these questions, I started to think about then psychedelics and intoxicating and non-intoxicating, and what do we mean by all this? And I tried to keep things practical. So you do have therapeutic uses of non-intoxicating psychedelics, perhaps, if we have such things. We've heard, I think yesterday, a quick allusion to these things. You know, they're creating neuroplasticity in the brain, and they're can be substituted for SSRIs or something like that, like typical medication for depression, for example. You don't want to be very, very stoned when that sort of thing is going on necessarily. So I can see that. That's a kind of non-intoxicating psychedelic, at least in a very strict sense. Now, there might be therapeutic uses of intoxicating psychedelics as well. I've heard about, for example, hospice care, where the actual realization that might occur in a kind of intoxicated states is something that helps you deal with the fact that your life is going to end soon. So I think in that case, you do need the intoxication, you need the trip, and mere neuroplasticity won't necessarily help. I think of psychedelic art derived from first-hand psychedelic experiences. Great. I kind of have an archetype in my head of what that's like. And I just showed you the examples of the film and media art and stuff like that. I get that. Then you have such a category as psychedelic art derived from second-hand psychedelic experiences. This would be a kind of aesthetics thing where you have the art displayed, but you don't really need to think about the source in terms of the, epistemological questions. Was this an experience that actually occurred and then somebody reported it? It probably doesn't even work like that in real life. So are we worrying too much or not? I'm not sure. But the question then, if you're thinking about, for example, therapeutic things, whose experience am I describing when I'm describing this transformative experience? I experienced it, but because why? Was it somebody else's imagery that sort of prompted it thing? Is this a problem then? Am I using cultural artifacts to describe other cultural artifacts and then just labeling that as my experience? What's mine about it then? Ego death probably occurs at some point if you think about that too long, but that's actually a kind of problem if you think about these things in a linear fashion. Does it matter? I don't know. You tell me. I'm very, very confused at this point if any of this has any kind of therapeutic implications. Okay, so what have I concluded then, despite everything? I think I have to conclude with something because I have just a couple of minutes to go. I suspect that we all, when we are asked, we have a kind of prototypical psychedelic experience in our minds, sort of an idea of what that is. I have mine. It's probably something like Fitz Ludlow going nuts on hashish oil in Poughkeepsie, New York, trying to figure out what the hell is going on and trying to look at philosophy books, thinking it's not here. What's happened? That was the thing that's happening to me. Help me. And yeah, for me, and I realized this, and I kicked myself for realizing this late. It's him. There's the pronoun for me, in a little room trying to write out what his experience was like. Now, that's a very narrow view of things. I think there's more to it than that, and we should keep examining our own kind of preconceived notions of what the psychedelic experience is all about and what is it at its core, even though there might not be a core. And this kind of implies to me that there's a kind of pluralistic approach that we should have to these types of questions. That way we can include more types of experiences and get a clearer picture of what on earth is going on. That also means, I think, that there's lots of work to do, and not just for one person or two people or three people, but a whole bunch of people. And analysis has to be done on many descriptions of many experiences. So what I've ended up with is I'm going to try to discard the idea that there is a psychedelic experience or the psychedelic experience and try to think that there's actually quite a few different types of psychedelic experiences, and that I don't know much about most of them. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tommi Kakko, for your wonderful presentation, phantasmatic presentation. And I'm really happy that you ended up here at the conference and your presentation was not lost on the streets of Turku.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a little bit of time for one or two questions, something like this. Anybody in the audience?
Thank you very much for your talk. It was fascinating. So my question perhaps might ring controversial to some, but I'm very interested in your viewpoint on this. So you went through some examples of media and art, and I think there might be two categories here. On the one hand, let's call art and media that in some way are trying to express or portray what a psychedelic experience is like. But then there's other forms of art and media, especially the instance of the DJ that you started off with, that is not saying, oh, I'm trying to express or describe, but that you can have a psychedelic experience just by listening to the music, or some people might say just by doing breath work, or, you know, insert your example here, virtual reality. So I was wondering, what is the reason for which people are trying to say that other things are just as much like psychedelic experiences as taking psychedelics? Is it simply because people, given prohibition, are trying to find any way to have something like the cultural artifacts that they hear, a first-hand experience of it? Because, I mean, to be quite blunt, I think anyone that's taken substantially enough amounts of psychedelics knows that it's not the same thing if you listen to a slightly trippy sounding DJ set. So what's going on here? Yeah.
That's a good question. It could be solved by the fact if psychedelics became illegal or even mandatory and we all took them a lot, then we would know stuff, but that's not going to happen. And some people really shouldn't take psychedelics. We've also seen that. I think it's a fascination with, this is my sort of quick answer to it. I think it's really a fascination with the phenomenon itself. And now, thanks to the psychedelic renaissance, we're hearing, I think, much more about it these days. It is a means of trying to connect with what has kind of been an underground phenomenon for such a long time, and it's kind of sweet in a way. So you don't want to go and barge in and say, no, you have to take 5 dried grams in a dark room in order of psilocybin, just to kind of get any idea of it. But yeah, there's a difference there, because the categories that you kind of split apart there is, of course, when you take psychedelics, it's like something happens to you. You can't really help it. And the other thing is something, the non-psychedelic experience is something you do and you have to push and try, and you can get to something like it, but it's not just this uncontrollable, oh my God, what is going on thing. So it's a kind of fascination by the general gen pop, basically, come in and we're trying to then kind of explain what's going on with the imagery itself. So I don't want to kind of be judgmental about any of this. I mean, I think it's great to have psychedelic art. I'm great that there's, stuff that's derived from it and all the rest of it. But there is a kind of categorical difference I kind of need to draw, and you have that in research into therapeutic uses. For example, it's about the substance, and it's, you have that combined with therapy and all the rest of it. So I'm almost literally dancing across the line here and trying to figure out both sides. But I think I'll just stop rambling and say, I think it's a fascination with the phenomenon that's coming from mainstream audiences. And I don't know, should we welcome them in? I think so. I should say, yeah, have a go.
Okay, thank you, Tommi Kakko.
you very much.